All right, everyone, we are going to be starting a new unit today, Enlightenment and Revolutions. So we're going to start out by focusing on the Enlightenment and its impact. This will be the only notes video for this part of the unit, at least. You're going to do some stuff afterwards with some documents and some questions based on it. While you're watching this unit, you should be filling in the guided notes that you were given. They are also posted on Google Classroom. If you do not have them, the hard copy with you, you may want to you'll fill them out online. So here we go. Introduction to the Enlightenment. Okay, so the Enlightenment is an intellectual movement in the 18th century Europe. The key ideas were reason, liberty, progress, constitutional government. It challenged many of the traditional beliefs about and authority, and it influenced politics, society, and culture. And you have some of the main ones, Enlightenment philosophers here. A couple of them you probably are familiar with, Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. We are also going to talk about several other members of this group that aren't listed on the page here. Okay, so the three major Enlightenment philosophers that we need to know for Global 10, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and another guy named the Baron de Montesquieu. So the three that are on the slide here are the three you need to know. John Locke, he is basically the guy whose ideas show up in the Declaration of Independence. He was one of the most significant of the Enlightenment thinkers. His ideas were things called natural rights. Natural rights are simply rights that we're all born with that no one can take away from us. He referred to them as life, liberty, and property. Civil rights are often some of the things that we talk about when we talk about natural rights. More on that as we dig into the unit. And then there was the social contract theory that John Locke came up with. And it was basically this idea that there's a kind of an implied contract between government and the people they govern. That if the government will take care of the rights of the people and protect the rights of the people allow them to govern. And when they don't take care of the rights of the people have the right and the duty to overthrow that government. Baron de Montesquieu, he is probably the one you are most familiar with his ideas because his ideas show up in the Constitution, and you studied the Constitution in 7th and 8th grade with Mr. James or Mr. Sparks, whoever you had. And his idea was separating power so that one part of the government could not become too powerful. And also built into that separation of power is the idea of direct democracy. And then finally you have Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who talked about direct democracy being the best form of democracy. This is really only can be accomplished in a small setting because it's everybody comes together who lives in the area, who lives under the government, and they all vote on and create the laws. And he said that it's very responsible to general will. Rousseau also talked extensively about the social contract between the governed and the government. So make sure you've added that under Rousseau, social contract. Okay, so Locke, a little bit more on him. Developed the concept of natural rights, life, liberty, and property. Proposed the social contract theory. He argued extensively what we call the consent of the governed. Okay, governments can only rule with people's consent, with the consent of the people that are being governed. And if those people choose not to give their consent, that the government will cease to function. It will be overthrown. He is a massive influence on modern democratic thought. So now you're going to answer quickly on Edpuzzle how Locke's ideas relate to modern government. All right, Montesquieu and the separation of powers. He proposed a division of government into three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. Prior to this idea of this, most places, all of that power laid with the king, the right to make laws, to execute the laws, and then to be the judge over who broke those laws. The idea behind the separation of power was to prevent tyranny and to protect citizens' rights. He's a massive influence on the Constitution and how we set up the three branches of government that you should be familiar with. Within that idea is the idea of checks and balances that you see on the chart. Some of those should look familiar. That's the executive branch checks and balances on the legislative and the judicial branch that you probably are familiar with. So you got another question here that's going to pop up. Why is the separation of powers important in the government? All right, and then finally, Rousseau and the social contract. Okay, Rousseau came up with this idea of a general will of the people. Okay, the people had this general things that they wanted. A lot of it had to do with, independence and the right to property and things like that. He advocated extensively, as I said before, for direct democracy, meaning people making the laws, the everyday laws. Very impractical idea in a large country, a large place. Really only can work in a small group because you just can't get everybody together as the people being governed gets larger. Okay. He believed in the importance of education. He's a massive influence on the French Revolution that we're going to talk about in the coming weeks. So try to answer the question here as it pops up on Edpuzzle. All right, so the Enlightenment ideas in action. So why do we even care about this stuff? Okay, they influenced the major political revolutions that really created our modern world. Most significantly for us is the American Revolution, and in the context of the course, it's the French Revolution. But really, these guys shaped the modern concepts of human rights and democracy that I would hope you all care about, and it leads to reform in education, criminal justice, and governance. Women's rights get their roots in the Enlightenment. We're going to dig into these a little bit more in one of the coming lessons. But one of the people you need to know is Mary Wollstonecraft. She's an early feminist philosopher. She argues for women's education and equal rights. She challenges traditional gender roles, and she lays the groundwork for the future of women's rights movements. So how did Enlightenment ideals contribute to the fight for women's rights? Think about these rights that people were born with, the idea of natural rights. How would that contribute to women's rights? Okay, and then next up is the abolition movement and Enlightenment ideas. Okay, so you guys have learned in the past about slavery and the slave trade and the abolition movement and eventually the end of slavery in this country. It takes a little longer some places, and it happens a little earlier in others. One of those places was England, okay, the mother country, which brought slavery to the Americas, but then in the time frame after America gains independence, while we're still going strong with slavery, the British start to talk about getting rid of it, especially in their colonies. That movement is led by a guy named William Wilberforce. He's a British politician and abolitionist. He uses Enlightenment concepts to argue against slavery, talking about, again, people's natural rights. He emphasizes human equality and natural rights, and he leads the abolition of the slave trade in the British Empire. So again, another question to answer here on Edpuzzle. And then our final thing we're going to talk about, and we're going to break most of these up into a couple days in class where we'll take a deeper dive. The last one being what's called enlightened despotism. Some monarchs adopted Enlightenment ideas while remaining absolute power. You have to hopefully remember from last year that most of the monarchies of Europe, which is where it was the dominant powers on the planet at this time, and quickly becoming even more powerful, were ruled by absolute monarchs, rulers that were not accountable to the people. The best example of this is Catherine the Great of Russia. She learns about these Enlightenment ideas. She promotes them in her country, in Russia, in some aspects. She promotes education. She promotes the ideas of modernization. She corresponds with many of the philosophers that we've already mentioned here. But at the same time, she maintains an autocratic rule where she is the only power. Okay. She makes the laws. She's judge, jury, and executioner. But at the same time, she's talking about these Enlightenment ideas. So I want you to think about the contradictions in this concept, okay? You have someone that is pushing for these ideas that we just talked about, but at the same time remaining an absolute autocratic rule, that allows people to throw people in prison just at any time they want. Give me some contradictions that maybe you can come up with there. All right. So finally, just kind of the legacy of the Enlightenment. It shapes our modern political and social thought. These ideas are alive and well today. Influences the constitutions and governments worldwide, most significantly here in the United States. Promotes scientific and rational thinking. The ideas of the Enlightenment go hand in hand with many of the breakthroughs that happen in science at the same time. Okay. And it continues to impact debates about rights, freedom, and governments worldwide. So I want you to see if you can give me an example or two of these in our modern society. Okay, and that will wrap the video.